you, Harry, for that rendition of Sketchbook. Appreciate you so much. And welcome to the Hugs Not Drugs podcast. I'm John Barleycorn. I'm here with Hugs Not Drugs and Dr. Uggs. And we're going to get right to part 2 of John G. after we do the commercial. And go ahead and do the commercial, Dr. Uggs. All right. I can't wait for part 2 of John G. But here's the commercial. John Forlenza-Bailey is sponsoring the Hugs Not Drugs podcast, and he has 2 books that he's written. The Road to Wellness Workbook is a workbook that you purchase if you have a substance abuse problem and your mentor needs to help you with the workbook assignments so that you can get better from addiction. It covers abstinence, the concepts of abstinence, relapse prevention, family dynamics, and self-assessment to continue to discover yourself. And recovery's up to you. Mentors help. Journals help. You must exchange and surrender destructive behaviors for constructive ways of handling day-to-day stressors or triggers of life. No one deserves to continue to suffer from active addiction. Get better, do the work. Also, I like this book, The Transformation of Dr. Uggs. It's my story. And my story, I transform into Hugs Not Drugs at the end. Spoiler alert. And The Transformation of Dr. Uggs is an original fairy tale that explains the progression of the disease of chemical dependency. It's not intended to be a story about blaming others for the acquisition of an illness. This fairy tale is intended to explain, not to blame. It is a story of discovery, insight, acceptance, and finally the right choices to live drug-free if one is chemically dependent. So now back to you, John Barleycorn. Go for it for part 2 of John G's story. It is amazing. Could you talk about the spiritual awakening? Because I can't, it's like, it's disgusting that this poor guy can't get it together.
Yeah, and it got...
Help a brother out.
Yeah, and it got to the point that I was still living with, so I had moved back, and I was still living with my new wife, and it was my son at this point now was, I'm talking December 9th, 1988. So basically the way that year started with a gun in my face, it was pretty much downhill after that. That was like the highlight of my year. Was the decision to hand the kids the 3, because you know what, if I didn't hand them the 3 hits, I probably wouldn't have a year. I wouldn't be here talking about this. He probably would have shot me. And, if I would have tried to have taken his gun away. So on the morning of December 9th, and the way that started out was it was a Thursday evening, December 8th. I had just gotten paid. I was at the firehouse. I didn't have my car with me, and I was going to take the train home. And I called my wife, and she was pregnant now with our second child, our daughter. And I called her up. I said, "Yeah, hon, I'm going to, get my check and come home tonight." And so as I approach Church Avenue, where the train station is, I see 2 sets of neon lights. One of them said Eddie's Liquor Store, and it just, the lights were kind of like that halfway flicker, and I'm looking at the neon sign, and that got my attention. And then I looked forward to the train station, and right behind the entrance to the subway, there was another neon sign that said, Cambiase los cheques, Cambiase los cheques. And I said, yeah, man, I'll go into check cashing. And that's what I did. I went into check cashing. I had 2 weeks pay plus 40 hours of overtime, which was the equivalent of 3.5 weeks pay. And I went around to Eddie's Liquor Store. I got 2 shopping bags of booze. And then I went to this addict's house that I knew that was right down the street from the firehouse. His name was also Eddie. And I went to Eddie's house, and there was some young ladies hanging out. And I start peeling off cash, and they're running around the corner to get crack cocaine. And by about 7 o'clock in the morning, we're pushing stems to get dust to see what we can, get. And we're basically out of money. I had spent, I don't know, it was well over $1,500 that night. And so now I was broke. And So now these young women are looking at me and they say, well, you know what? We could take the beer bottles, old English 800 whatever beer bottles, and they were going to go around the corner so that they could get another $3 or $5, so we could get just one more hit. And I was feeling pretty hopeless, and I got up and I was getting ready to leave this mess, because when you're out of money, when you're out of wampum, it's time to step off. And I was only as good as how much money I had on me at that time. And as I was walking out, I'm looking down the hallway to the bedrooms, and one of the women that was there, she's now standing there with a water pipe and a negligee, looking really good. And she just says, John, I saved some from last night. Come back here. Come back here. And at that point, I was a married man, and I looked at her and I knew exactly what was going to happen if I went back there. And the temptation to do so was absolutely overwhelming. But in that moment, it was like lightning struck. And I had this sense that that is not going to make me feel better. It is going to make me feel worse. And I had asked the God of my understanding, the God that I come to know when my dad, when he was maybe 20 years old and I was 4, because they had me when they were 16, put me on my knees and taught me that simple prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. Lord, I pray my soul will keep. And if I die before I wake, I pray, oh Lord, my soul you'll take. And I didn't understand that, but I could see the love in my father's eyes as he looked down at me at that point, being such a young man himself. And I remembered that connection. It was like the first time I really experienced a connection to what I thought God was. This power that was great in us, this power that would protect us, as my father would protect me. And he looked at me in such a way that I felt that, yes, God, that's what's protecting my daddy. That's what's protecting me. And at that moment, in that crack trap, that morning, I had asked God for help, and it may have been the 100th time, but it was more than a foxhole prayer wanting to get out of it. It was like, I don't know what I need to do, but I know that if I don't do something different, I'm going to die. So I went back to the firehouse, and I was supposed to be working that evening. And I told one of my buddies, Richie, I said, Richie, I just can't deal with this anymore. And I need to go to the counseling service of the fire department and turn myself in, because I had heard about guys that had gone to detox and rehab and such. And I said, I need help, because I had already been to the counseling service, for marital problems. And one of my buddies, one of the guys that ended up dying of AIDS, was there when I was going for marital problems, and he had gotten sober. And he says, John, if you'd like, you could come into this meeting we're having over there. And they were having an AA meeting. And this was when the counseling service unit was at Pier A North River. It was this beautiful pier, which they eventually turned into a restaurant. The city sold it, and overlooking New York Harbor. And I was going to go in there for a meeting, and my buddy Terry said, John, there's a chair here with your name on it when you're ready. But I just wasn't ready. And subsequently, he ended up going back out with me and relapsed and told me about how great it was to be sober. And eventually he got sober. He died sober. He was a couple of years sober when he died of AIDS, as was another guy in my firehouse. So getting back to that morning, I'm talking with Richie, and he says, and this is the morning of December 9th, he says, John, you can't go to rehab now. He says, can't you wait till after Christmas? I'm like, Richie, I'm dying here. Like, what do you mean you want me to wait till after Christmas or wait after New Year's? He goes, John, you're the cocaine dealer for the firehouse. We need you to get all the blow for the Christmas party.
All right. I just want to point out that you didn't use after that, though.
No, that was it. And I went to the counseling service unit, and I met this lieutenant who was transferred. He became a counselor, and he looked at me, and I was really hopeless and really desperate and really sick. And he looked at me with this gleam in his eyes that I've got a live one. I can do something with this kid.
All right. I just want to point out to the listeners, I think now we're going to have to get the smile surgically removed from Hugs Not Drugs' face, because he can't stop smiling at you. Wow, what a spiritual awakening.
And this was a beautiful thing, because he called up Freeport Hospital. And I was sick, I wasn't vomiting on myself, but I was absolutely sick. And he looked at me, and he's smiling and he's talking to the counselor at Freeport. And he says, and they ask him what kind of condition. He goes, well, he definitely needs a detox. He just threw up on my shoes, Ray T, what a guy. So he drives me home to my house and my wife is in shock. I come to the door. She had no idea what was going on, had no idea where I'd been all night, had no money to give her, and she's standing there, with our son who is like 10 months old and she's 5 months pregnant and just beside herself. And like, no, he's just going to get some clothes and I'm taking him to Freeport Hospital, which is what I did. I kissed her goodbye, went out to Freeport Hospital for 5 days. I met people there that ended up being mentors of mine later on that actually, I was trying to become a credentialed alcoholism counselor in New York State a few years later after I had gotten hurt on the fire department and was going to retire. And it turned out that my detox counselor was going to be one of my great, great mentors, this man. And then they had the foresight to send me to this place called Smithers Rehab, which you may have heard of the Smithers Foundation, and people in AA are familiar with that.
I work with Dr. Brown Mayers. I don't know if you ever met him, but he was my medical director when I was clinical director. He loves Smithers. Smithers was the premier place.
Yeah, so they sent me there, and I was like, "Why are you sending me to some building in uptown Manhattan? I wanted to go to Seafield." And my original plan was I would dry out, as we say, and I was going to play tennis for a few weeks, and then I was going to return to the saloon wearing penny loafers, corduroy pants, and a nice cardigan sweater with the sleeves tied and hung over my shoulder. And I would say, "Gentlemen, I'm here just to have one this evening. Thank you."
So you really went right. Okay. It's been, now you're sober. It's 1988.
88.
At the end of 88. So that gives you, this year you're going to have.
I just celebrated 37 years on December 9th on one white chip.
Okay.
And one of the amazing things was, upon my initial assessment at Smithers, they told me that because of the extent of my addiction and what I had been through, they told me that the chances of me staying clean and sober 1 year at that point were less than 1%.
Sure. Well, there's no way. The only way that an addict and an alcoholic can stay well is one day at a time, and the grace of God and the fellowship, as far as I'm concerned. Is that what happened to you?
Yes, that was very much the case. And I can remember my first meeting when I was in Freeport Hospital, and I was wearing a hospital gown that you tie in the back. And at that point, my behind was hanging out, and I'm wearing styrofoam slippers with smiley faces looking back at me.
Not a good look.
And I'm about 14 hours out of my last one, and now I'm starting to get really angry, and the Librium just wasn't kicking in enough. And I was about ready to beat up somebody. And then this joker from AA says, "Well, you're willing to do whatever's necessary." I'm like, "Man, I'm willing to stand on my head in the corner right now with my behind hanging out, just because I had the gift of desperation and willingness at that point." And and they told me, "Well, we do this thing one day at a time." And then they started throwing out all these slogans, but I just remember that what I'm doing now, this has to get better. And they said it will get better. And I'll never forget when Ray T drove me to Freeport Hospital. He looked at me and he says, "John, if you just follow some simple suggestions, you can have a life beyond your wildest dreams." And I could see the fire in that man's eyes. And I said, "I don't know what it is, but whatever this guy's got, I want some of that," because that man to me was happy, joyous, and free. And I was trapped and miserable at that point. And I was desperate and I was looking for a way out. And, I went to Freeport, and then after I left there, and that was an awakening, because I remember my very first night, I was in a waiting room with some other people that were in like a waiting room, and we were all patients wearing our hospital gowns. And one guy looked at me, he smiled, he goes, "Is this your first time here, kid?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh." I look at him, I said, "Well, how many times you been here?" He says, "I've been here 5 times. I said, "Really?" Now my heart's starting to sink a little bit. And he says, "Well, that's not bad. He goes, Charlie over there's got the record. And I look at Charlie and he gives me this kind of coy smile. And I go, the record? He goes, yeah, I've been here 50 times. And I said, geez, I might be in more trouble than I'm anticipating. But I just said, I'm going to just, put faith in the idea that, I asked God as I understood God for help. And the miracle of that was when I genuinely asked God for help and to help me stop living the way I was living. From that moment to the time I went to the firehouse, to the time I went to the counseling service unit, and then to Freeport, hospital detox and Smithers Rehab, the everyone that I needed at exactly the right time came into my life. It was like they say, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear.
That's
and
right.
Man, did I have some teachers.
That's right.
And I cannot, for me to truly express the gratitude that I have for the teachers that came in my life, primarily my first sponsor as well, and what this program has given me over the past 37 years, to truly express my gratitude, my tears of joy would have no end.
We've gone about 55 minutes. So I'm going to have to do a part 1 and part 2 for this, and I'll do the addiction thing, and then I'll do the recovery thing. But I just want to mention, let's talk about these 37 years. You have the time?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. And it really has been an awakening because, when I first got sober, I remember I was of course, there was the incidents at Freeport. And, in the very beginning there was a point on my 5th day, I think it was, they had a TV that had a lock on it. This big, a big, CRT style 25-inch TV that weighed about 150 pounds, and it was on a stand and it was locked up. And the security guard, who was an off-duty Nassau police officer, apparently he didn't like New York City firemen, and he heard about me. And we're watching a game. It was the Jets against Miami, and Marino's got the ball, and they're at the 20-yard line, and he's fixing to throw a touchdown. And I'm watching this, and the guy comes in and smiles at us and turns the TV off because it was like exactly 11:45 or something. And I just went, I started growling at this guy, and he walked out, and I walked out into the hallway. I had lifted the set up, and I was pretty stout and pretty good, shape at that point.
You're
I was
in very good shape now, too,
yeah.
brother.
And I've been doing that, which is another gift of recovery. So I pick up this rather heavy TV set and carry it out into the hallway in my hospital gown, and I'm growling and literally growling at this guy. He says, "Come on, throw it at me." He says, "Come on, throw it at me." He goes, "I'll get Charlie in here." And I come to find out that Charlie was a guy who was a physician's assistant who I came to know when I started volunteering there for my, internship as a counselor. And Charlie would always look at me and say, "Johnny, if they give me any trouble, I just knock them down with a little Thorazine." He goes, I give them the needle. They'll shut them up quick, and then they'll be doing the shuffle. And I said, holy shit, am I glad that I didn't have to do the shuffle that night. And I had the good sense to take a breath and put that television back on the stand. And that guy was just coaxing me and telling me, come on, because that's what he wanted to see happen to me. But now, I went to Smithers, and what was really an awakening was
I just want to interrupt. That was beautiful aversion therapy. He allowed you to make that choice by loving you enough to confront you.
Yes. And today, if I met that man, I'd want to give him a hug.
Yeah.
And so now, they transfer me over to Smithers, and I meet this counselor, and she tells me about how, I'm probably not going to be able to stay clean, and of course that was motivational, and we're sitting there talking. She says, I have an assignment for you. And I said, yes. She says, whenever you go to a meeting, she says, I know you're attending the meetings here, the AA and the NA meetings, and I want you to stand up and say, hi, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I need to stop blaming people, places, and things and take responsibility for my own recovery.
What good therapy and suggestions. You were blessed.
And I did that, and there were others that just stood around. But you know what? I said it, and I had my doubts about it, but deep down, I really believed it. And then she gave me this assignment that was absolutely, foundational for my recovery. She says, John, I want you to write about 10 episodes, a couple paragraphs each, and I want you to write about episodes of how your addiction, your alcoholism made you powerless. I want you to write about 10 episodes of powerlessness. So, and write and tell me about, people, places, things, who, what, when, where, why, and how kind of thing. And now I actually give this assignment to guys I sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
And what I tell them to do is, because, the senses, the five senses are very important memory devices, mnemonic devices.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell them not just who, what, when, where, why, and how, but tell me, what did you hear? What did you see?
Mm-hmm.
Smell, the olfactory sense. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really big one. What did you smell? What did you taste? What did you feel? Was what you were feeling, was your head going against the steering wheel or the dashboard? The taste, all of this kind of stuff. And so I wrote
they were exercising that therapeutic technique of dialectic behavioral therapy, mindfulness.
Yes.
Yeah, you had some good therapy.
And so now I write about these 10 episodes of powerlessness, and I have probably the better part of 20 pages. And then she looks at me and says, that's good, John. Now I want you to write about 10 episodes of unmanageability. So I said, this is taking me a few days here. So I write another 10 episodes on unmanageability. And then I go back to her office, and she looks at me and she says, oh, very good. You finished it. And I said, yeah. And she says, let me ask you something. She says, are you an addict? Are you an alcoholic? And I looked at her and I hesitated. And she looked at me and she says, well, let me ask you another question, John. She says, did you notice any difference between the powerlessness and the unmanageability episodes? I said, no, I could have used either one for either. It's all about both. And she says, good. And she smiled. And she says, you know something? She says, did you read this? I said, well, why would I just finished writing it? She says, yeah, but did you read it? I said, no. And she says, oh, okay. Well, I said, why would I want to, read it? And I handed it to her, and she handed it back to me. And at that point, I was rather disappointed and discouraged, because I was very proud of my literary genius at that point. And it's like, it was like, I thought that it was kind of like Hemingway, like The Old Man in the Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I had this great novel, and I was going to call it The Young Man in the Hood, and it was going to be turned into a Spike Lee movie or something like that,
She wanted you to feel it.
Yes. So I sat back, and she says, John, I have some things to do in the office, but sit right here, and I want you to read all this. And when I read back all of the insanity of all of this, it hit me like lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat there and I reflected on this. And then she looked at me again after I finished reading it, and I looked at her with a different, serious, sullen, but somewhat grateful smile. And, I might have very well been the poster child of ambivalence at that point. And then I looked at her, but then with absolute clarity, I was able to answer her next question. She says, John, are you an alcoholic? Are you an addict? And I looked at her and I said, I see what you did here, because writing it is one thing, but when I read it back and really reflected on what it is I wrote here, and really read with my own eyes the insanity of what I had done, you know what? This has removed all doubt. And that was the saving grace of that therapy and what that counselor had done for me. It was genius of her to do that. And I look at that to this day as being the foundation of my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Because that gave me the willingness to continue on. I got honest. In the second step, we get that hope, we come to believe. And then in the third step, we get the faith, which that leap of faith, today I look at it as one of my friends in Georgia used to say. He says, today I have faith, and faith is hope with a track record.
Right out. What an honor. Barleycorn here. What an honor. I want Hugs Not Drugs to wrap this up for us. Okay, thank you. I was over in the corner crying about your addiction. You know, Dr. Ruggs was right, and I was just feeling your pain so much, and I just and now I can't get they may have to do surgery on me to get my smile removed from my face because your story is so inspiring. There's no way, John, that you know they talk about the four doors: jails, institutions, death, or recovery, and your spiritual awakening has allowed you to have a life way beyond your wildest dreams, I'm sure. uh, I want to thank you, and we'll continue this. Any final words?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, and the pleasure is all mine here. This has been a wonderful experience. And, when we talk about the grace and mercy of God's love as expressed in the experience, strength, and hope of people in recovery, it's really simple. I tried to do it on my own. And I was kind of like that camel trying to get through the eye of the needle. It wasn't going to work, and I was hopeless. But what you told me in AA and in NA was very simple. It was, you know what, John? Alone, we cannot do this, but we can do this together with God's help, because man cannot do this alone. No man can do this alone. But with God's help, all things are possible.
I got a joke.
All right.
I've said this joke before. It's like one strawberry said to the other, if we weren't in that bed together, we wouldn't be in this jam today.
That's right.
All right, we're going to stop that. I just want to thank you again, and Harry, take us out. And remember, hugs are better than drugs. So enjoy, everybody. Have a great day.
Have a great day, buddy.